education opportunity for social workers and substance abuse counselors working in the state of Hawaii. So if you'd like to be credited for the 1 hour of continuing education credits, please complete the survey at the end that will be sent out. And if you're calling in by phone, please follow up with us by email. And definitely by the end, I'll list that email. We'll also try to put it in the chat if you're not sure who to contact. Next slide. And I am very pleased to introduce our panel. It's an awesome panel today. We have Diane Paloma from Little Home, James Koshiba from Hui Aloha, Micah Kane and Michelle Kauhane from the Hawaii Community Foundation. So I'll be giving you guys a little bit more in-depth bio as we introduce each one of their segments. But just to give you guys a preview, these are the awesome people who are joining us today. Next slide. Before we begin, our team's really been talking about evolutionary cultivation and how we make connections between people and place and within place, right? Those elements of place very often are certain geographies as well as certain plants that can be connected to value systems or experiences, or in very practical ways, they're actually healing plants or la'au. But additionally, language is also healing. And so we'll be sharing various olelo no'eau as we go through this presentation. And the one we wanted to start it off with to set the stage that you guys can see here is O ke kahua mamua mahope ke kukulu. And the site first and then the building. And I think that's what a lot of these webinars, I've been to most of them, we're really trying to create a new foundation in this time that's unknown. It's kind of, thrown us all into this feeling of upheaval and potential overwhelm. But what we're all doing now by coming together is really trying to create this new site, right? Leveling the site before we build. And I think each one of these webinars, this one included, but all of the others, are really setting that foundation for what we're going to build into the future. Next slide. As well, our team has come up with a framework that, since we're actually going to be giving subsequent webinars, we've come up with a framework that actually uses teacher plants, if you will, to think of ourselves as humans in this wellness ecosystem. There's not really a separation between nature and culture. They're really one. And so the plants that we're going to be highlighting along with themes today are koa, which we're connecting to transformation, pili, that we're connecting to connections and relationships, and then the a'ali'i, that we're connecting to resilience. So we'll be speaking a little bit more about these themes and ideas, and each one of our panelists as well has stories that connect to transformation, connection, and resilience. And because the slide deck is also available at the end, you guys will also have links that will give you more information about the plants themselves. Next slide. So we are on to our first speaker. And I'm really stoked that Diane is here. She's someone that's really been working in our community in many different ways. She's currently the Chief Executive Officer for the King Lunalilo Trust and Home. A Kamehameha Schools graduate, she received her BS in Psychological Science from UCLA and an MBA from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and a PhD in Healthcare Administration from Capella University. Diane has spent her career in the health field since 1995 and was able to combine her passion for Native Hawaiian culture with the health and medical fields. But as we all know, right, amazing people aren't just usually amazing in one particular area. So Diane has also gone through the Uniki process for the status of Olapa with Kapa Hula o Kamehameha, and that is led by Snowbird Benzo. So that's kind of a cool side fact there about Diane. Next slide. And before I hand it over to Diane, the theme that I think that you will see as you listen to her stories about what she's doing, we've chosen hulihia and transformation. And we're definitely, I don't think I need to explain to you guys how this is a time of transformation. I think we're all feeling that. But to think of, to huli, or to turn or to overturn. And we've chosen koa, for that. And if you visually even see the difference in the brand new leaf at the bottom that's curly-cued in terms of the more mature ones, this plant really is representative of transformation. And we also create things out of the koa tree that very much transform it from a tree, that kumula'au, into a functional object. But Diane has her own stories that I think are going to affect our community for a long time. So Diane, I turn it over to you. Next slide.
Okay. Mahalo. Everybody can hear me okay, yeah? So aloha, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I also thank my esteemed panelists, friends of mine, and other people who I respect very dearly. I'm just going to share a couple of things. I know my time is limited. I'm not going to take up too much time from the other panelists, and always welcome any follow-up after the webinar as well. So just to give you a little bit about Lunalilo Home, we're an adult residential care home. We also have an adult daycare, which, yay, just reopened today after a 3-month, I'll call it the COVID hiatus. And we are located in Maunalua, which is the traditional Ahupua'a name for Ho'ikai. And we've been here since 1927. We started off in 1883 over at Makiki, which is kind of close to where Roosevelt High School is right now. And I just wanted to reiterate kind of the theme, I guess the theme of the year, the theme of the month, the theme of the day has always been Hulihia. And while it does mean transformation, I can also interpret Hulihia as total upheaval, upending, similar to the first picture titled with the kupu kupu coming out of the lava flow. So if you recall from 2 years ago in 2018, that lava flow taking out basically all of the Lani estates in Puna, that is Hulihia, right? And then you can start to see the regrowth and the rebirth. And so today, I'm just going to share a couple of things about how COVID has affected kupuna care, and a couple of my thoughts probably on how I foresee kupuna care transforming into the future, looking at a very, very vulnerable population that's made even more vulnerable now by COVID and the risk of this particular infectious disease. So could I get the next slide? Okay, so this is a little bit more of the technical things. Like I said before, this vulnerable population of kupuna, or our seniors or our elders, has been made even more vulnerable with this COVID population, with this COVID disease. So you see this population, right, staying home, not able to even get groceries, not really being able to go out and socialize in the same way that they could before prior to this. And where other industries have been able to pick up in distance learning, such as these formats and webinars, I will say that Zoom or any other platform that you use, whether it be Microsoft Teams or whatnot, you cannot dress a kupuna, feed a kupuna, bathe, clothe, or even take someone to the bathroom via Zoom. I would say if somebody can figure that out, then I would be the first to sign up for some of those technical platforms. And what we found is, despite having Zoom, because we use it for family visits, for doctor's visits, for physical therapy visits here in the home, does it really replace human contact? And I think one of the things that I prided myself on at Lunalilo Home was to be able to have that direct human interaction. You can see kupuna thriving when they come to a place where they can socially gather, have personal relationships with each other, and really be able to make those social connections, which we are all trying to deter now during this state of COVID, right? With social distancing, staying home, not visiting, not being able to hug or honi someone is very different from our culture. And so when I think about what that means into the future of caregiving, I think that caregiving is now, in a way, probably to a certain degree, held hostage by this elder care infrastructure. we in nursing care homes prided ourselves on group activities, group sharing, lots and lots of social interaction. But because we are now having to limit those because of COVID, it really changes the way that we're able to adequately address care and provide that really human one-on-one contact that I think everybody needs for kupuna. So when I think of this hulihia, or this total upheaval of our system, we're seeing that in all industries. We see it in tourism, we see it in even government. And so it makes me think of what are the ways that we're going to look at new platforms of care. How do we access caregivers? And how do we essentially focus around families rather than individual kupuna? And so when I say that, I think of individual kupuna as, yes, they are the clients, they are the resident here in our home, and we are the ones doing the day-to-day caregiving. But they also are connected to families, powers of attorney, the people who decide their caregiving needs. And so how do we better support them while they are socially distanced and separated? So I think what we're heading into is this total upheaval of the elder care system. And although I'd like to say that I know where we want to land, it also depends on a lot of other moving parts with government funding and the way the medical system works. So those are all things that I've been, this COVID has been able to allow us to resonate and think about what those changes look like in the near future. Next slide. And I'm gonna kind of tell you a story about how it kind of all started with the garden. So this is just gonna be kind of one storyline, one example of how we are starting to transform some of those infrastructure, maybe I wouldn't necessarily call them barriers, but infrastructure challenges that we have in the elder care infrastructure. So in 2017, I arrived here in the fall, and one of the first things I noticed was the abundance of delivery trucks coming to drop off maybe, anywhere from $30 to $100 worth of produce and food supply. And so I kind of had a crazy idea. I think the HMSA Foundation and Dawson companies bought into my crazy idea, and we helped set up these 12 garden beds, raised garden beds that kupuna could also socialize around. We could get community groups. Some of the listings on the slide have already come over the years to help grow that garden for us. And really it was to generate some abundance in the objects of fruits and vegetables. But I think it also healed, in a sense, some of the land that was around here. And so we have like 5 acres. I'm finding you don't need a lot of land to be able to grow food. And that was probably the start of how we were to engage with the community, how we were able to see a need within the home, and how to create kind of a catalyst for engaging social enterprise and social groups to our care home. And next slide. And the next slide, you'll be able to see kind of the transformation over, this is the 3 phases. So the first phase was when they built, the phase on the left is when they built the garden beds in the back of the Manila home. The middle picture is about 1 year later, and this picture on the right is our latest picture from February. So you can kind of see the abundance that's been growing. And I think one of the things about our dietary program at Lunalilo is that we really feel that we're not just feeding stomachs. And of course, there's all of the regulatory things associated with nursing care homes and diet. All diets have to be reviewed by a registered dietitian. They are by doctor's orders only. Supplements, the preferences are all taken into account for our meals. What we've really seen just like skyrocket over the COVID crisis is our meal delivery program. So on average, our kitchen pumps out about 1,000 meals a month. And that was probably for a good 2.5 years that I was here at Lunalilo. Just in April, and May alone, we've done over 6,000 per month for those same meals. I will say it couldn't have been done without community support, and it couldn't have been done without a GIA grant that we got to upgrade our kitchen equipment. So luckily, we were prepared enough to be able to handle this volume. It's testing the limits of our kitchen, but it's also making us, not just us, but making everybody feel a little bit more secure in terms of where are these meals going to come from. And so that leads to the future discussions about what is going to happen when this emergency food funding ends for these kupuna. We saw the dramatic increase in need for food, for meals. Again, not just for kupuna, but for everybody in general. When we saw food supply chain breakdowns, that's probably another talk story. But things like Metagold and the milk supply, or when we had the beef, pork, and chicken rationing in a certain sense. How would we feed our kupuna when those food supply chains are compromised? So those are the types of conversations that we're having in order to really prepare for that moment. So we realize at some point the emergency funding will end, and then where will that leave kupuna? Will that leave them even more vulnerable? And how do we mitigate that so that when that happens, we are well prepared and we're able to address that need that we are almost foreshadowing. Next slide. And so, I use this metaphor of the kupu growing out of the lava flow because after what may seem as destruction, despair, and overrun, and literally putting out fires with lava flows, you have the kupu, which is always one of the first plants to regrow after the lava flow. And so I think it's so fitting that the koa tree that we used in the slide earlier is a part of that transformation, right? Because when you have the kupu, you have that ground foundational layer. And then as you grow, as the forest grows, you start to replace a lot of the tree lines with koa trees. And it's the koa that really helps to reforest the lushness, the abundance, and the energy of that aina. And so, I'm just trying to think of when we look at when we're regrowing this forest called our Hawaii economy and all of these other issues that are facing us on a day-to-day basis, what is the forest that we're going to build? And in thinking of all of the kupuna that are now, the employees and the workers now are going to be kupuna at some point in the future. So how do we prepare for that and provide the canopy of the forest to be able to help support those vulnerable populations? So I know I went really fast, but I do want to allow other time for my panelists, and then I'm happy to take questions either now through the chat room or afterwards as well. I'm always open to email questions or phone calls. So mahalo. Thanks. And I think I'll turn it back to you, Naila.
Mahalo, Diane. That was great. Thank you so much for sharing, not just your entire story, but the pivotal stories right now for us to understand where you're at and how you're looking at the future. Before we move on to our next panelist, James, I'm going to ask everybody, similar to what Diane said, if you have questions specifically for her, feel free to put them in the chat right now. We will have a question and answer at the end. But as I'm saying James's bio and as we move forward, here's a question for all of you guys, and please feel free to put your answers in the chat if you wish. How are you responding to this time of hulihia? And what has been your primary strategy? So again, this is not quite a question and answer, but it would be great to kind of aggregate your responses, and this will give us a temperature read on where everybody's at. So let me repeat that. How are you responding to this time of hulihia, and what has been your primary strategy? So if you'd like to share, please put that in the chat. Can we have the next slide, Joy? Okay, well, I am very proud to introduce our next panelist, James Koshiba. He was born and raised in Hawaii. He holds a BA from Brown University and a master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. James is co-founder and principal of Social Ventures Consulting, which provides policy research, program design, and advisory services to government, nonprofit, and foundation clients. He's also the co-creator and president of Hui Aloha, for which he's speaking to today. You can find more information about them at huialoha.org. It's a nonprofit formed to demonstrate how rebuilding community and connection to each other can generate creative solutions to some of society's most difficult and pressing problems, including housing and houselessness/homelessness. He's worked for Blue Hub Capital. He was the founding executive director of Kanu Hawaii, and he serves on the board of Pu'uhonua o Wai'anae, the nonprofit organization that was now working to build an affordable village for 250 residents. But before I completely turn it over to James, Joy, could we have the next slide? And I'm just going to introduce the theme and the plant teacher that we've connected to James's story. So obviously, Hui Aloha, that sense of all of us coming together as a community with aloha, is a very direct connection to this idea of pilina or relationships. And the olelo no eao that we've chosen here is He Hale Pili'ia. And so, yes, it seems like a very straightforward, basic statement of it is a grass house. But when you think of the community that needs to come together to collect all of those materials to make that house, the relationships that are required, in addition, what is the purpose of that hale? It's usually to gather, right? To address a community conflict or to bring like-minded ideas together to solve a particular solution, or to simply grow those bonds of connection that during times of challenge will really underscore resilience. And I want you guys to remember resilience because that's our next theme. So without further ado, as you listen to James, please be thinking about pilina or connection. James?
Mahalo Naya. Yeah, you know what that resonates, and what both you and Diane shared earlier really kind of struck a chord. A lot of folks think, as those that know it, think of it as a homelessness organization or organization. But really the mission of Hui Aloha is about connection and building that sense of connection. And the only thing I would add to the framing that you offered not only is connection on a personal and community level, really powerful in terms of transformative potential, but it's also very damaging if we lose those connections. You know, Diane was talking about kupuna that feel a sense of isolation. Anybody that has broken their ties with their family and community, really hard to move forward from that place unless there's a reconnecting of some kind to somebody. And so that's really what Hui Aloha is about. And we started with homelessness or houselessness because that's a place where we saw a separation in need of healing and bridging. So you see in this picture the core folks behind Hui Aloha, and it's a mix of houseless and housed folks. That's me pre-COVID when I used to have hair. Next slide, please. So just real briefly, I'm not going to go through all these, but a little bit of background on Hui Aloha. It's an all organization. I talked about that connection piece. All Wai'anae, the houseless village at the Wai'anae Twinkle Gorge is our North Star in a lot of ways. Twinkle is a dear friend. We consider many of the leaders like family, and they're a close-knit part of our Hui Aloha team. We learn from them constantly. What we do really is just to folks on the streets and on beaches and in our parks and on a personal level without an agenda. And that part is really important. We're not trying to get them into a program or produce some kind of outcome. It's really just to make a connection first. But if and when we come across somebody who is trying to take care of others, trying to take care of that place, taking initiative to do something positive, we try to support them with everything we've got. And so that's where that third bullet under community building comes into place. we look for people to partner with on the street to be of service to the wider community. And that service piece and the partnership is very important. And then once there's some service happening, then we try to connect those folks with the wider. The benefits, those connections in and of themselves have a positive and sometimes transformative effect on people's lives, including my own as a volunteer, but also with the houseless folks that we're working with. And one other benefit I would point out is that it's a strengths-based approach. Yeah, it's not. It doesn't focus on the deficits. It doesn't assume that everybody needs to be fixed or that there's a one-size-fits-all. Instead, it looks for where there's some positive energy already happening and tries to build upon it. And in every houseless encampment that I've been to, and I've been to dozens across, is somebody that is taking care of other people, taking care of that place, cleaning the bathroom, picking up the rubbish in the park, and trying to do something positive. And so that's what we look for. Next slide, please. Just a couple of quick examples, and this is all pre-COVID. We worked with folks in, there was a houseless encampment, fluctuated in size, but last year we worked with them late 2018 and throughout 2019, and it was probably about 100 folks. And we found what was initially just a small group of people that would park clean up. So they would lead supplies like trash bags and gloves. And we started doing the weekend in late 2018, early 2019. It started small, but it quickly grew into an effort that 20, 30, sometimes 40 people from that encampment who are coming out every to do a park cleanup. Next slide, please. It started just in their park where they were camped. So they were camped on the Mauka end of Kakako Gateway Park, right along Ala Moana Boulevard. But pretty soon, they got so good at it that they wanted to expand. So around that time, the Children's Discovery Center had announced that they were in financial trouble. And in part because the houseless folks camped around there, that it was driving guests, visitors to the center away. And so what these guys from the Mauka end of the park decided to do was to expand their cleanup around the Discovery Center and also urge all the people that they knew to move away from the center and move Mauka to where they were. And you can see some of these images are from around the center. They actually got everybody to voluntarily move away from no enforcement or sweeping required at that time. And that was in February and March. February and March, for about the next year, they went back to the center around it every Saturday. So one example of service, kind of empowering people, and also connect to the wider community, because the executive director of the Discovery Center thanked them for their work, spoke about them to the neighborhood board, and they started to change the relationship between the encampment and their community. Next slide, please. One other example I'll share, pre-COVID, this is Waimanalo Beach Park. And there's an encampment of about 45 folks there living at the beach park right along the highway. It started as sort of a park cleanup. But pretty soon, these guys were looking for something more to do. They got so committed to cleaning the park that there was a group of people from the encampment that would weed out the cuckoo grass in the park, the thorny grass. And their mission was to make it possible for anybody to walk barefoot in the park without getting any thorns. They quickly expanded beyond the park and started looking up and down the coastline for areas that they could clean. And right next door to that area called Mulivai Olena, which is a place of both ecological and cultural importance. And 808 Cleanups, a local nonprofit, was for that area. And so folks from the encampment jumped in to help. And these are images. Again, it was a weekly cleanup and it turned into a weekly effort. Next slide, please. their efforts won the support of the neighborhood board. So actually, when there was a sweep that was planned of that encampment, the neighborhood board stepped in along with several other community organizations and the state not to sweep that encampment, that there was happening there and a partnership building. So again, that connection to the wider community was kind of a natural result of the service. Next slide, please. Skip past this one. This is just the our work and the folks got some recognition, and again, that connection to the wider community and also to government is an important positive outcome. Next slide. So fast forward to COVID in March. You may recall the city and the state. One of the things as the outbreak was unfolding was closed all of the public restrooms across Oahu. And, us being so closely connected to hospitals, we knew this was going to be a severe hardship on folks. And people were in a panic because obviously there's no place to use the bathroom. There's no place to wash up, no place to clean during the outbreak. And this was in direct contradiction to the CDC guidance as well, which said, do not sweep encampments during the outbreak and keep bathrooms open 24 hours a day if possible. Next slide. We launched a petition, and within about a week, it had over 1,000 signatures. And so the city and the state agreed to reopen the bathrooms. But one of the things that we heard from them was that their struggle was they didn't have the staffing, they didn't have the PPE, they didn't feel equipped to go to take care of the bathrooms in a way that was necessary during the outbreak to ensure people's health and safety. And so what we offered was to actually engage houseless folks using that same model of partnering with them to help take care of those bathrooms. And so next slide, please. We called the project Bathroom Brigades, and we had more volunteers than we knew what to do with. People volunteered to take care of the bathrooms, to clean the bathrooms on a daily basis in Ala Moana, Kaka'ako, Waimanalo, 2 of the bathrooms in Waianae, both at the harbor and at the beach park. And then a real blessing was Alea Bridge learned about our project and wanted to replicate, and so found bathrooms and park for their services and replicated there. So that was April 1st, the first week in April. And those bathroom brigades have been going ever since. Those volunteers cleaning the bathrooms daily, disinfecting. We supply them with the cleaning supplies, and then we meet with them every week and restock them with whatever they need, including PPEs. Yeah. Next slide, please. They've been doing an awesome job. They've won praise both in the area and from the frontline staff who normally clean those bathrooms. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to share a couple of quick stories about the impact this has volunteers themselves. So on the left is a woman named Roiti. She lives at Puhonua o Waianae, unhoused at the Waianae Boat Harbor. And she takes care of the bathroom. That's actually a DLNR bathroom at the Boat Harbor. And on the right is Ida. She lives at Waimanalo Beach Park. The bathroom is at Waimanalo Beach Park. Both of these women, when we started out, said we're very hesitant about having any kind of recognition for them. It was a struggle even to get them to take, to share. And the only agreed to have their picture taken when I said just about keeping the bathrooms clean. You guys are doing a service to the whole community. And we also want to challenge houseless people as folks that are lazy or vandals, care of the bathrooms, agreed to have their picture taken. But over the course of the work, they really kind of came out of their shells and started to own the work. So recently, just in the last couple of weeks, they both agreed to go on camera view. Ida was featured on KITV, gave a very impassioned description of her work with the brigades and how she was doing her community, not just for the folks living at the beach park. So just a really positive transformation in these women, and just through the work and the service. Yeah. Next slide. And I mentioned the Leia Bridge, the last anecdote that, this has also been really amazing to see. That's Dee on the left in the pink shirt is staff with the Leia Bridge, and she is just with it. So now they're up to 8 bathrooms. She too has more houseless volunteers than she knows what to do with. Those are some of the volunteers on the right. But all of which goes to, again, kind of identifying people taking initiative and building on that initiative has really radical positive effects, and not just in the lives of houseless people, but in rebuilding that fabric of community that's so critical, and the healing and the sense of purpose for all of us, both houseless and housed. Next slide, this is my last one. So to go back to kind of the core of what both this effort, Hui Aloha work is about, healing, to bring it back to health, it's about this idea that connection heals and community heals in and of itself. And that, programs are important, advocacy is important, charity is certainly important. Existing approaches of housing first and jobs first and sobriety first, those are all important elements, but they're not enough and that rebuilding that connection and that community is really the key to refinding and reestablishing our purpose, a deep sense of safety and healing and health for all of us. Mahalo.
Aloha, thank you so much, James, for that. We're going to do something similar as we did after Diane's presentation. I'm going to give you guys a question, kind of reflective question, and please put your responses in the chat if you have one. And also, feel free to give a shout out to, all of the partners that are working to support you in the chat too. This is definitely a time to celebrate the ecosystem that we're in. So please feel free to go ahead and do that. So before I introduce Micah and Michelle, if you guys could think on this, what pilina or connections, relationships, have you strengthened or built from the ground up, through this BHHSURG community? So we would love to know that, and really shout out to the partners that are doing amazing things for you. A little bit of housekeeping here. I do want to acknowledge the questions in the chat that are more logistical or about funding. We can definitely work to tackle those at the end, or we can also aggregate some of those and send them to our panelists afterwards. I also wanted to remind people, anyone who's on the call for credit, make sure you take the survey afterwards. And if there was any issue with your registration, or you didn't sign up, or you're on the phone, please make sure that you put your name and your email in the chat and note that that's what you'd like, so we're able to actually contact you guys and ensure that that information is passed along. So next slide. Okay, so we have a tag team here from the Hawaii Community Foundation. So first, to introduce Micah Kane is the CEO and president of the Hawaii Community Foundation, which is the state's largest and oldest foundation that works with individuals, families, foundation, government agencies, and organizations to transform lives and improve communities. He received his bachelor's degree from Menlo College and an MBA from the Scheidler College of Business at UH Manoa. Prior to taking the role in July 2017 as the third CEO and president in HCF's 100-year history, Micah served as its president and chief operating officer. He was responsible for leading the executive team day-to-day and the day-to-day operations. He's also served as an HCF board of governors for 8 years before joining HCF formally. Micah also currently serves as a trustee for the Kamehameha schools. Michelle, there you are, Michelle. Michelle Kauhane is the Vice President of Community Grants and Investments at Hawaii Community Foundation. Previously, she served as President and CEO of the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, where she engaged in lending investment services, deploying capital in underserved communities statewide. Michelle has a strong background in nonprofit management, community and basic economic development, and public policy advocacy. She served on numerous local and national boards and currently sits on the Community Advisory Council at the Federal Reserve of San Francisco to offer perspectives on the economic and financial services needs of low and moderate income populations. She's a graduate of Gonzaga University and Kamehameha School's Kapalama. New slide. And I'm going to cover their theme and their plant teacher here before I hand it over. So kupa'a, or resilience, is the theme for this segment. And again, we want to underscore that there are a variety of plants that could have been paired with any of these terms. Really walking into the space of making connections between people and place, and more specifically, people, place, and plants. A lot of that really has to do with your genealogy as an individual person, or your background, or maybe through your mentors or your particular areas of study. And so we're choosing He A'ali Kumakani Mayau, A'ohe Makani Nana E Kulai. And so, A'ali'i, if any of you know it, is a beautiful plant, but it's also kind of, craggly, and it holds onto the ground, and it definitely holds its place. And this Olelo no Ea really talks about, despite these gusts and gales of wind, that the plant bends but does not break. And I think a lot of the work that the Hawaii Community Foundation is actually, again, serving to create communities that are going to be very similar to this. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Micah and Michelle.
Mahalo nai. Before I begin, I want to thank, on behalf of Michelle and I, the opportunity to be with you folks today. Also want to mahalo Eddie Mercero and his team for all the work they're doing during this COVID period. It's been a real joy, an educational journey for our team to work with your team, and really, you guys have really good people there, so mahalo. Also want to thank Diane and James for all of their work. And James, by the way, I prefer the latter hairdo than the pre-COVID hairdo. I think you match it very, very well, and we welcome you to the fraternity. What I'd like to do is just give a couple opening comments, and then I'm going to pass it on to Michelle, and then Michelle and I are going to tag team the final 3 or 4 slides that we have. Just a little bit about Hawaii Community Foundation. As Naya said, we've been around for over 100 years. There's over 900 community foundations around the country in all shapes, forms, and sizes, and foundations have the kind of legal flexibility to evolve as the needs of the community evolves, and we try to do that at the Hawaii Community Foundation. We manage today over 1,000 funds that represent, over $700 million, which allows us to put a little over $70 million into our community every year. And while that may sound like a lot, it really isn't when you look at the demand that's needed out there. Behind each of those 1,000 funds are people and organizations that had dreams and aspirations about what their resources would do. And all of them were aspirational dreams of impacting people's lives, much in the same way that all of us on this call are trying to do. And we take that privilege very seriously. Over the first 90 years or so of our organization's life, we were very much falling under the very traditional model of a community foundation, very transactional. We accepted the responsibilities of a trust, and we cut checks to those organizations that our benefactors asked us to cut those checks to. Our move today is towards more of accepting more of a civic leader role in a way that is attempting to build networks in our community around a common data set to create some collective action around some consistent goals. And so really where we see our path is around changing systems in Hawaii. COVID was an opportunity we felt to accelerate some of the system changes that we felt were were hurting our community and creating a very inequitable community for us. And so we're going to share a little bit more about the Olelo at the end, but it's really around taking advantage of the crisis we're in to try to change systems today. So I'm going to pass it on right now to Michelle. She's going to cover some of the work we've been doing in the COVID period, how we are approaching it, and then I'm going to try to speak to a framework that we've developed, that we created for our board to pivot a lot of our work in the months and years ahead towards really changing systems in Hawaii. And so I'll pass it on to Michelle right now.
Thank you, Micah, and thank you all for allowing us to have some time. I'm going to share really our focus at the Community Foundation through COVID in establishing the Hawaii Resilience Fund. And so to the theme of resilience, and as Micah talked briefly about the change framework is definitely grounded in both people and place. We use data to tell us about where there are gaps or opportunities for us and our investment by benefactors to make a change based on that data that we see. In order to launch the Resilience Fund, and what allowed us to move so quickly is that prior to COVID hitting, we were dealing with the lava flow disaster and also the flooding on Kauai. And following that, we laid out a 4-phase strategy that says when we get into the next disaster, whatever that is, we need to be more prepared. And so if you look at this slide at the top of the landscape, it breaks down the 4 phases of our grant making process. We launched the Resilience Fund about 10 days after the first case was found here in Hawaii. And we started to deploy capital in these stages. And so the first phase of our grant making really focused on flattening the curve, understanding that we needed to make sure that our healthcare system had capacity to handle what was coming its way. And so we funded folks serving vulnerable populations that included homeless, our kupuna, the FQHCs who help the most vulnerable among us, to really focus on risk reduction and readiness. Phase 2 of our grant making focused on rapid relief and response. There we did much of our work around ensuring that families had food. So the food banks and a lot of what you see happening at the Aloha Stadium, we really focused on getting direct service to folks who needed food because jobs were lost so quickly, food and financial assistance. So we have a network of statewide providers who are issuing grants directly to families who have not received any income or unemployment so that they can get cash in their hands quickly. As we move to phase 3 around recovery and stabilization, we're looking at restoring our economy, putting dollars out in the community through social impact investing and really supporting our local CDFIs to get capital out where it's needed the most. We're also still focused on food sustainability, and we're working with the nonprofit sector right now to figure out how we best support their capacity overall, because we know that many of our nonprofit organizations are struggling through this difficult time. And then phase 4 will take us back into our normal grant making process where we look at our data, engage with community, and focus on our change framework. So next slide. And I'll turn it back to you, Micah.
Mahalo, Michelle. As Michelle stated, before COVID, we were hyper-focused on a lot of these outlier inequities that were showing up in our data. What we saw in COVID was really just an exacerbation of those outliers. And so what COVID provided us is an opportunity to ask our board to give us the privilege of really channeling our resources that we have, both those that we were going to raise around the Resilience Fund, along with the balance of the funds that we have that we were going to give out over the course of the year, and really try to channel it into making a big difference today. And in some cases, hopefully we can push ourselves to actually change systems. So we had to create a framework by which we approached our work. And so it focuses on 4 primary components. On the top part of the panel, where you see the orange dots, we call them out as interventions and events. And so we were managing early on during phase 1, 2 major events and 3 major interventions. All of them had consequences that we had to deal with, that needed mitigations, and that needed people to step up. And so that was the framework that we presented our board. An event causes consequences. Those consequences need to be mitigated. Who's going to step up and deal with those mitigations, and present how we fit in that framework. If you look at the top